Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. Bienvenido todos esta noche. Tonight we gather to celebrate in one evening the work the Latino Justice Pearl Deaf has done over the last 50 years. My name is Isabela Araujo, and I am a partner in the New York office of Wilkie Farr & Gallagher in the Executive Compensation and Employee Benefits Group. Although my work is much less exciting than that done by Latino Justice, it is with great honor that I sit here tonight as Latino Justice holds a special place in my heart. I was a baby law student over 10 years ago when I heard Juan Cartagena speak at Columbia. He spoke about the work the Latino Justice Pearl Deaf did and explained why it was important that we also joined. I think it's sometimes easy to stay in our safe bubbles and think that others will do the change that we want to see get done. And what Juan Cartagena explained was that you had to be that person. You had to be the champion for others who were not in your privileged positions. And what a privilege we are to be lawyers, to be people of color, and to live in the United States where our change can be readily felt by those who really need it. I think it's important to stress too, especially after a long day when we feel tired and perhaps beat up, that we are in a position of change as lawyers. We have a lot of power and we should use it to help those who need us most. As I think over the last 10 years and how lucky I've been, newly partner at Wilkie Farr, and here I am today about to introduce Latino Justice's newest president, anything is possible. While celebrating 50 years is an incredible milestone, tonight that's further amplified by Lourdes Rosado. The president's address will be given shortly by Ms. Rosado, who's the 10th president and general counsel of Latino Justice and the third woman to lead the organization. Ms. Rosado joined in the fall of 2010 following Juan Cartagena's retirement after he served for 10 years. And for those of you who are not familiar with Ms. Rosado's background, just to put a little bit of it in perspective, she brings over 25 years of experience to Latino justice as a champion of social justice. She's challenged the recession of DACA, the enactment of the Muslim ban. She's fought dangerous conditions of youth confinement and child welfare facilities. She's confronted employers who expose employees to sexual harassment and a hostile workplace. She's defeated efforts to prevent immigrant children from enrolling in schools. The list goes on. Ms. Rosado has more degrees than I have time to state tonight, and she's also been honored numerous times. Some of you may be familiar with her work on the infamous Kids for Cash scandal case, where she successfully advocated to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to vacate the juvenile delinquency adjudications of thousands of youth. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Rosado as she speaks about what the next 50 years will look like at Latino Justice. So while we take tonight and this moment to think about the last 50 years and think about how much work Latino Justice has done, let's also take a moment to appreciate the work that has been done, will be done, and is being done currently. And I am excited to hear what Ms. Rosado has in store for the organization as she champions for additional fighting and advocacy on behalf of many, many people across the globe. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Rosado.
Many thanks to you and Wilkie Farr and Gallagher for hosting us and for that lovely welcome. I really appreciate it. And congratulations to you for becoming a partner at Wilkie Farr just this month. That's wonderful. It's so great to see Latinas and Latinos advancing in the profession, because as I'll talk about in a moment, leadership development has been one of the core parts of our mission at Latino Justice since its founding. I also want to just say that Latino Justice draws so much energy and strength from a number of wonderful corporate and firm partners. Groups like Wilkie Farr, Weil Gotshal, Aiken Gump, Goldman Sachs, and Southwest Airlines, to name just a few. And we really thank you for your support tonight. I also have to extend many thanks to our Líderes, which is our young professional board at Latino Justice, in planning this president's address. And thanks to all of you for joining me this evening to kick off Latino Justice's 50th anniversary year. I know we've all probably put in a long day of work, so I'm very grateful for you spending the time with us this evening to hear about our legacy and to hear about our future. Our theme for this year-long celebration is Bold Legacy, Bolder Future, Advancing Equity, Justice, and Leadership. 3 brilliant young Puerto Rican lawyers made a bold move. They decided to use the legal system to challenge the inequities being perpetuated against Puerto Ricans in New York City. People like me and my family. Jorge Batista, Victor Marrero, and Cesar Perales launched the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, a civil rights organization that would turn into today's Latino Justice Pearl Deaf. And today, Latino Justice draws on this bold legacy and honors the vision and determination of Jorge, Victor, and Cesar as we map out our course to build the power of the Latinx community in the United States. Indeed, Latino Justice has made its mark in so many ways. For example, by working to ensure equitable access to economic and educational opportunities, by supporting the rights and journeys of our immigrant brothers and sisters, by protecting our voting rights, and advocating for the fundamental transformation of a broken and harmful criminal justice system. We also fight for the people of the island of Puerto Rico, as well as those who are in the diaspora. And we, as I was saying earlier, one of our main goals is to nurture leadership within the Latino community. Now, as we look ahead at 2022, we are focusing our energies on key pillars. That's what we call our issue areas here, pillars. And also in the areas, the geographic areas where Latinxers have the capacity to make a big impact and where Latino justice can add a much needed culturally competent legal perspective, what I like to call our secret sauce. So this year, for example, we are litigating in Florida to block implementation of a voter suppression law. In fact, we're going to start trial in federal court in Florida next week. Very excited because this is a heinous law that is going to aim specifically at preventing people of color from voting. We're also gearing up our Cada Voto Cuenta election protection project in multiple states to ensure that Latino voters are able to cast their ballots during, for example, November's midterm elections. We are also working in a number of states on the ground to ensure that the power of the Latinx community is not diluted in the current redistricting process, but instead actually grows to reflect our growing numbers in the US. This includes, for example, Latino Justice's work here in New York City on a unity mapping coalition, which is really an extraordinary effort where 3 different organizations representing the Latinx community, that'd be us, our Black allies and our Asian American allies came together and worked cooperatively to produce a series of electoral maps that really ensures that all of our communities are recognized and empowered, and that those empowered do not try to pit peoples of color against each other in this redistricting process. We are also striving to make police more accountable and end discriminatory and abusive policing practices, including in our current lawsuit against the Suffolk County Police Department. We're also challenging some long-established legal decisions, jurisprudence that found that Puerto Ricans were, for example, and I quote, savage and uncivilized and unfit to handle the full rights and duties of citizenship. These decisions are still being cited by our federal government in litigation to this day, even though they are rife with racial animus and prejudice and just fundamentally contrary to our Constitution's guarantee of equal protection. And we are always at Latino Justice advocating for workers, the workers who experience exploitation and discrimination, sometimes sexual harassment and abuse at the hands of unscrupulous employers. And this is really just a small slice of our work in the year ahead. But what I really want to talk to you about tonight is what we're going to be doing with regard to planning for the future. In addition to this robust docket of litigation and portfolio of projects happening this year, Latino Justice is using 2022 to plan and begin a trajectory of growth and expansion that's going to take us into the next 2 to 3 years and beyond. As the new president and general counsel, my aim is to steer Latino Justice into an even bolder future, to really honor our legacy. And I want to share those plans with you tonight. So thank you so much again for being with us. My goal is really to enhance and grow our regional and national reputation as a leading civil rights and social justice organization, and seek even more strategic opportunities and partnerships to build the power of the Latinx community. So in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to add new strategies to our toolbox. We're going to build our docket in existing areas and also expand into new emerging issues, those issues that are really the most important to the Latinx community in this period of time. And we're going to deepen our work in those states where Latinos are growing in numbers. Now, like all of you, I am appalled and concerned about what I read about every day, the well-financed and well-coordinated efforts across the nation to suppress the growing power of communities of color, including that of the Latinx people. We're just witnessing an all-out assault on civil and human rights and our democracy itself. This includes attacks, organized attacks on the right to vote, and attempts to dehumanize our nation's immigrants and deny them benefits and access, and all the counterattacks that we're seeing on our efforts, our noble and hard-earned efforts to rid our systems of structural racism and discrimination in all forms. And I just want to say that what I'm talking about tonight, all of our efforts to build Latino justice in the coming years are in service of a much larger goal, really our organization's mission, and that is to repel these attacks on the Latinx community and our democracy, and instead amplify our community's voice and grow our power to shape the future direction of our country. So to do that, one of the first things that I'm working on and will be working on is to really grow our organizational capacity to do this critical work. We really have great potential to expand our footprint. And what's important, I really want to emphasize, is this growth in our capacity is really needed because there are few organizations that have Latino Justice's reputation and credibility in the Latinx community. We are trusted to speak on behalf of our community because we have spent decades in the trenches with members of our community in fighting for equity, fighting for justice. Now, thanks to the wise stewardship of my predecessors and our board, Latino Justice is in the best financial position of our history. And as the incoming President General Counsel, I'm so grateful to those who came before me to ensure that. So we're able to build capacity, and we are hiring. We're hiring more staff to join the talented and dedicated professionals at Latino Justice. And we'll be larger in size, probably, again, than we've ever been in our history by the end of 2022. In addition, Latino Justice is enhancing the execution of existing strategies, but also adding more tools to our toolbox. So litigation is, of course, a tool that we wield a lot at LJ. And this year, we brought on a new director of litigation, Gita Schwartz, who is a Latino Justice alumni and seasoned litigator who most recently came to us from the Center for Constitutional Rights. And we are hiring more litigators for Gita's team because litigation will always be a core strategy for LJ. We need that litigation muscle to push back against and stop the onslaught of efforts to suppress the increasing influence and power of the Latino community. We need those lawyers to do exactly what our team in Florida are going to be doing next week, which is going into federal court and stopping a voter suppression law from going into effect. But all of us here know that the federal judiciary, including the U.S. Supreme Court, has fundamentally changed in the last 5 years, and it has become more hostile to so many of LatinoJustice's key priorities, including voting rights, redistricting, and voting rights, redistricting, and workers' rights, just to name a few. So what I'm also planning to do, in addition to litigation, is to really build our capacity to advocate for positive changes in state laws, regulations, and agency policy in those states where we have a presence and where Latinos are growing in power and numbers. Latino Justice will, by growing this capacity, really have a more powerful and proactive tool to complement our litigation. We'll use our litigation strength for defense and policy and legislative advocacy for offense. And with that combination, there really are no limits to the transformation that Latino justice can jumpstart in so many areas of the country. So we're going to build our bench to hire professionals with experience in leading state-level campaigns to change these laws and policies. And I think this is a natural extension, natural outgrowth of what the work we've been doing at Latino Justice for so many years. We have had a lot of experience with employing a grass tops organizing approach that is driven by the leadership of impacted persons in our communities. And the last thing I want to talk about in terms of capacity building is just my desire to use this year to enhance our reputation as a thought leader by building more capacity to do things like hosting convenings, publishing more white papers, and commissioning films, which are such an amazing vehicle for stimulating dialogue and thought-provoking dialogue and reflection. Films like our Decolonized Justice series of films, which is aimed at changing the narrative around discriminatory policing and the mass incarceration of our community, and building leadership in the Latinx community to challenge and dismantle these unfair and debilitating systems. So in addition to the capacity building and putting new tools in our toolbox, we're going to be deepening our work in some key issue areas and adding some completely new issues to our portfolio. There's so many issues out there that are in need of advocacy. We are living in challenging times. So it's always, a challenge in and of itself to pick and choose what makes sense for Latino Justice to take on, for us to take on a new issue area and really dive into it. So we here apply some guiding principles to sort of figure out what new areas of work to take on. The first is intersectionality. We really ask ourselves, does this new issue intersect with one or more of Latino Justice's existing pillars of work? It's very crucial. We also look to see if there's a niche where we can add value or a gap that we can fill. We don't want to obviously go in and pile in where lots of other groups are and they're getting the job done. But it's again about our special sauce and look, where can we bring our special sauce and add value? And also, and probably most importantly, we ask ourselves, is this an issue that is really critical to the Latino community in this moment in time? So using all that criteria, I've decided that my first major initiative as the new president and general counsel is to establish a racial justice center at Latino Justice. And we're going to use this year to build the foundation for that so we can have it up and running in the next couple of years. Now, the idea for the center really grows out of and is aligned with Latino Justice's fundamental mission to seek a more just and equitable society. And creating such a center really recognizes that we are in just a key moment in time as a country, not only as an organization, but as a whole country in confronting structural racism. And the Latinx community absolutely has a key role to play here. So we've already created the position of Director of Racial Justice Strategy here, and we've promoted one of our seasoned senior attorneys, Fran Fahana, into that position. She has a great background in racial equity, and we're also hiring counsel for this project. So now Fran and I and the team are strategizing, and we're working this year to develop a blueprint for the center. But I just wanted to share a little bit of our thinking about what that new center could accomplish. Like, we're thinking that the center will be a way for us to very systematically, more intentionally apply a racial equity lens to all of LatinoJustice's work. This is really an acknowledgement that the genesis and expression of inequity in this country is so closely tied and woven into racial animus. Second, we're going to also seek more alliances with Black-led organizations to further our shared priorities in areas such as, for example, ending mass incarceration and increasing police accountability. We're also going to take on some targeted advocacy on behalf of some within our community. First of all, on behalf of Afro-Latinos in our community. In the last decade, the number of people across the U.S. who identify as Black and Hispanic has increased more than 11%. And in the 2020 census, more than 1.3 million people identified as Black and Hispanic. Now, Afro-Latinos have higher rates of poverty as compared to white Latinos, and Latinos with darker skin, as we know, are much more likely to experience discrimination than those of us with lighter skin. So it's very important that we try to be more intentional about what advocacy Latino Justice is doing for that group within our community. Similarly, we're going to also seek more alliances with community-based organizations that serve indigenous individuals who come from, for example, Central American countries, individuals for whom Spanish may not be their primary language. Surveys of Latinos in the U.S. indicate that 1 in 4 identify themselves as indigenous, in keeping with the large numbers of indigenous people who we're seeing coming from Mexico and Central America. And indigenous people here are facing hardships, very unique hardships, such as a higher likelihood of experiencing separation at the border and delays in processing asylum claims. And on the most basic level, because of language barriers that they have, that because they aren't Spanish speaking, and the need for more people to be able to interpret for them in the immigration system. And at a more profound level, they're experiencing biased immigration policies and enforcement, drug enforcement, and enforcement of criminal justice policies. And finally, we really think that the center is really the vehicle by which we as a community, the Latinx community, can explore the concept of race within our community and how it intersects with national origin and ethnic identity, because really these are complicated issues that Latinos are grappling with. You know, in the 2020 census, which we just did, the share of Hispanics who identified their race as white in that census fell from about 53% in 2010 to about 20% in 2020. There was a large drop off, and the share of Hispanics who identified as other or 2 or more races actually jumped dramatically. So we can see that Latinos, Latinas are grappling with the issue of race and where we fit in. Where do we fit in the current dialogue and efforts to combat systemic racism? The Racial Justice Center at Latino Justice is really going to help us define what that role should look like going forward. So another key area that I want to tackle is within our economic and educational opportunity pillar. And so there are a couple of groups that I want to increase the focus on, and there are a couple of issue areas that I want to take on as part of that pillar. So I really want to increase our focus on 2 groups and pursuing economic and educational opportunity access. And those groups are the Latinas and LGBTQ&A persons. Latino Justice is going to expand, really try to figure out ways to expand and deepen our work on behalf of these 2 groups. Latinas we have nearly 30 million Latinas, women Latinas in the United States. And despite the persistent advocacy of many champions over decades, and I know that's been over decades because I was here to see it, despite all this advocacy, Latinas still earn 55 cents to the dollar in income and hold 5 cents to the dollar of net worth compared to white men in this country. There is a huge, huge gap here. There's an excellent report by our esteemed colleagues at Unidos US that demonstrates that a combination of factors, including lower wages and fewer job benefits, all contribute to a much wider Latina wealth gap when you compare the gap between, for example, white women and white men. At the same time, we know that Latinas confront discrimination in so many forms that are critical to success and well-being. We know that because oftentimes we're there fighting for them in court and with administrative agencies against those barriers. A Latino Justice Skadden Fellow did launch a groundbreaking Latinas at Work workplace justice project in our Long Island office to advocate for Latina immigrant workers who are subjected to sexual harassment and hostile work environments long before the Me Too movement took public hold. And we're going to build on that foundation and build on all the work that we're doing to bring lawsuits and file government complaints on behalf of Latinos who are discriminated against and sexually harassed in places like the workplace and in educational institutions. But we're going to add to that advocating for greater protections in state laws and state constitutions. And we're also going to up our game in advocating for key benefits that benefit women, Latina women specifically. And these are things like paid sick and family leave, health insurance, and universal paid childcare. These are just really essential to the Latina community in order to close that wealth gap, that income gap, and help them get a foundation for success. Another group who we feel continue to confront significant obstacles to their well-being are LGBTQIA plus persons. Again, they're about, it's hard to get good data, to be honest, but from the best data we can find, there are at least 2.3 million Latinxers who identify as LGBTQ, for example. And that represents about 5.6% of all Latinx adults. Now, Latinx folks in this community, in the LGBTQIA community, are, for example, more likely to be unemployed and experience food insecurity than non-Latinx. Than Latinx non-LGBTQ adults. And they also experience levels of discrimination and victimization in the workplace, in school, housing, and healthcare system, and sadly, even in their own homes and families. So we're going to continue to do our work to pursue economic security on behalf of this community by challenging instances where they are experiencing discrimination and abuse in the workplace. We're also going to do something that we haven't done in the past, but I think is very important in this point in time. And we're really going to explore what role we at Latino Justice can play in challenging attempts to seek religious exemptions from anti-discrimination laws, because we know that such laws are really essential for preventing the kind of discrimination that a lot of our LGBTQIA plus allies experience. So those are two populations we're going to be working more on behalf of, my hope is, with the right capacity building. But we're also setting up to deepen our economic justice pillar in two ways. That is with a new focus on housing work and a renewed focus on bilingual education for English language learners. So we're going to add the groundwork in the next 2 years to add this focus on housing. And that's because, and I don't have to say it for this group, but it's stating the obvious that housing stability is just key, absolutely crucial to success in all other areas of life, in particular education and employment, as well as overall health outcomes. But we've been talking a lot about this at Latino Justice, and certainly we see a lot of it out there in the air. There are discriminatory government policies, as well as actions by private actors that create real barriers to, for example, home ownership by Latinxers and wealth accumulation, and to housing, affordable housing in general. And home ownership itself is often the first step for a Latinx family toward building general wealth and generational wealth in their family. On the home ownership side, we know that Latinos face substantial structural barriers to home ownership, including inequitable access to credit, not being able to get enough money for down payments, and just lacking opportunities to build wealth. And they were hit really hard by the pandemic in all of these areas. Language and immigration status are also key barriers to Latinxers who are trying to obtain government housing assistance programs. And zoning and land use regulations also compete the construction of and access to more affordable housing. And, the recent tragic apartment fires in the Bronx here in New York and in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, really demonstrate that not only is it safe and secure housing critical for success, it's literally a matter of life and death sometimes. With all that in mind, we really are going to spend 2022 here at Latino Justice to build our capacity and our expertise so that we can do something around housing, around home ownership, and access to affordable housing. We're going to identify discriminatory practices and the places that we have a present practice like appraisal disparities and mortgage steering and co-op board discrimination, practices that violate the Fair Housing Act and other federal and state laws, and institute litigation to challenge these practices. We're also, as part of my desire to increase our ability to do state-level advocacy and campaigns, we're going to work to try to advocate for increases in funding from such programs that states provide, such as down payment assistance programs that would actually help Latinos obtain home ownership more quickly, and to continue to conduct specific outreach to the Latinx community so that they know that these programs are available for them. We're also going to advocate for more inclusionary zoning and land use regulation to increase the supply of affordable housing. Unfortunately, in some of the areas where Latino justice practices, the zoning and land use regulations are literally designed to prevent us from being in those communities, having homes and renting houses and apartments in those communities. And finally, and in keeping with our criminal justice pillar work, where we challenge and dismantle barriers to reintegration of formerly incarcerated persons into our communities, we're going to identify and challenge crime-free ordinances, crime-free housing ordinances that are really aimed at gentrifying buildings and pushing out Black and Latinx renters. So that's some of the work that we want to try to build the capacity, the expertise to do in the coming years. And so we're going to be focusing on that. But a second important part of our economic justice pillar is our education work. And so we really want to lay the foundation this year to up our game and renew our focus on English language learners. We know that the fight for bilingual education was a central part of Pearl Deaf's origin story, beginning with our seminal Aspira case in the 1970s. And language access is an issue that crosses all of Latino Justice's pillars. There are roughly about 3.8, just under 4 million students in the US who are native Spanish speakers and who are not proficient in English. And they make up the bulk of the approximately 5 million students who are identified as English language learners throughout the country. The fastest growing demographic in schools. And unfortunately, these English language learners are also the lowest performing as judged by things like achievement tests and graduation rates. This is a real burden on these children and their families, and we really have to do more to help them. Now, federal law does require districts to identify students with limited English language skills and serve them with an equitable research-based program. But what we know anecdotally is that the practices vary widely between states and school districts, and whether or not children are getting those services, children who are English language learners, is a little bit of a crapshoot, to be honest. So we really want to build our capacity so in the near future we can do more targeted advocacy on behalf of English language learners, ELL. ELLs, including, and this includes not only Spanish speakers, but the increasing number of immigrants from Mexico and Central America who speak an indigenous language. We also are going to, in the next 2 to 3 years, try to partner with an academic institution to conduct a really in-depth survey or analysis of what is the current state of bilingual education in the US. I say that because there really is a dearth of information as to how and whether we as a nation are actually meeting the needs of these children and their families. And finally, in terms of new issue areas, in the next 2 years, we're going to vet and explore adding a totally new pillar, and that is a pillar regarding climate change and environmental justice. We know that climate change and environmental damage create and exacerbate social, health, and economic inequities. It truly is a social justice, civil rights, and human rights issues. And the Latinx community is identifying and that addressing climate change is a major priority for our people, particularly the younger Latinxers, who are our fastest growing segment of the Latinx community. We know that, and it's not a surprise because we know that that climate change and environmental degradation disproportionately hurt people of color, the poor, and those who are furthest from opportunity. Now, the reason we're thinking about exploring this year and really thinking about whether in 2 to 3 years we could create a pillar around this work is that first, it's really intersectional with our other Latino justice pillars, such as immigrant rights and economic justice, and in particular, our work on the island of Puerto Rico. For example, in our past, Latino Justice challenged the U.S. Navy's decades-long use of Vieques as a bombing range and testing ground for live ordnance training. We challenge this because the Navy's spread of these depleted uranium and other toxic chemicals into the sea and local ecosystem really caused physical harm to the island's residents and damaged their economy, in particular their ability to farm and to fish. And then when the Navy finally ceased its weapons testing, and in response to that massive community outcry that LJP was a part of, Latino Justice jumped in again to demand that the Navy stop using open air burning and open detonation. These methods that they said were supposedly clean up methods, they were actually causing even more harm to the environment and the health of the people there. And in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, a lot of you know that LJ helped create a disaster legal response initiative to assist hundreds and thousands of affected Puerto Ricans, seek FEMA assistance, and aid in resettlement and relocation, sometimes to the U.S. And we sued more than once to extend voting rights to Puerto Rican evacuees who were in Florida and those living in hotels in other states like Massachusetts, New York, Florida, and Georgia. We provided thousands of hours as assistance to evacuees in Florida on housing, public school enrollment, and civil rights protections. And that's because we see that climate change is affecting not only Puerto Ricans who are immigrating here and others who are coming from other parts, but it's really affecting the Latinx communities throughout the U.S. We know that Latinos are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change because of where we live and work. According to the Environmental Defense Fund, more than half of Latino Americans live in the 3 states that are already experiencing the most serious effects related to climate change. And these includes, historic droughts in California, record-breaking heat in Texas, and increased sea level rise and flooding in Florida. And Latinos are more likely to work in those very industries that are deeply affected by the effects of climate change, such as agriculture and manufacturing and construction. In addition, environmental hazards like lead in water pipes and old buildings and exhaust fumes from idling school buses also disproportionately affect people of color, including our Latinx community. And that's because, in part, Latinx people lack access to some information due to language barriers or fear of interacting with government authorities, and generations of economic inequity that have concentrated in Latinx communities in the areas of greatest environmental threat. Plus, Latinx people are more likely to hold jobs in occupations that expose workers to environmental health risks, including air pollutants and chemical exposure. Now, as we're exploring whether we can build the capacity to do this amazing work, we're going to take some baby steps on local and state level to tackle some of these issues. That's first including developing and implementing a community education program that includes Spanish language materials, brainstorming strategies to increase Latinx access to green jobs, supporting state level legislation that does the same, as well as working on state level initiatives with partners to address things like lead and school bus admissions. And we're going to also seek guidance from community-based organization in the field to inform our planning. And so the major job of the coming year is to research whether and how Latino justice should and can develop a larger docket on climate change and environmental racism, including whether we should build the infrastructure to advocate on the federal level for change. So one of the things that I think is a gem at Latino Justice is our leadership programs. We have, since the inception of our organization, made leadership development a priority. And I really feel the urgency to continue to create and implement plans to actually grow this leadership at the critical time, because we are at a tipping point in the Latinx community, a tipping point to greater influence and power. We absolutely need more leaders who, again, identify and challenge inequities and to fight back against these attempts to suppress our growing influence and instead to grow our power. Again, it's been our role, our mission since our starting years at Latino Justice, when it was still Pearl Deaf. And we have, over the years, developed such a great continuum of programs to encourage, guide, and support Latinxers and youth of color, including those youth who are really furthest from opportunity in their journey to become attorneys, starting at high school, through college, and into law school and their professional careers. And we know that the alumni of Latino Justice, those who have gone through our leadership programs, who have interned with us and worked on staff, include government attorneys, civil rights attorneys, judges, elected officials, law firm partners, and general counsel at corporations, and leaders in all sorts of non-legal professions and community advocates. My plan is really to expand our leadership program by first seeking funding to create Latino Justice's own endowed legal fellowship. We really want to have the funds to sponsor recent law grads to come work for us. Now, my esteemed colleagues, Sherilyn Eiffel from the NAACP LDEF and Anthony Romero of the ACLU, they just authored an article with Darren Walker of the Found Foundation, citing the need for more civil rights lawyers to fight the racial and social justice battles of the day. And I'm totally on board with you guys. To do that, we must make it financially possible for students to become the leaders we need, as Sherilyn, Anthony, and Darren point out. And that's where we come in. Latino Justice will be seeking those funds to do that. And we're also going to put more resources into our tremendous alumni network and scaffold that network so that our alumni can be more of a resource to us in building out leadership. And finally, LJ is going to work on reestablishing a youth and emerging adult advocacy program within our leadership continuum. We specifically want to develop a youth activism program that trains and supports youth and young persons of color, including Latinx youth, to become advocates in various fora to advocate on behalf of Latino Justice's priority areas. So as you can see, we have really grand plans. My plans are big. Our plans here are bigger than you can possibly imagine. But as we have proven again and again, Latino Justice is more than up to the task of making this a reality. Now, I've laid out an ambitious year of research and planning for Latino Justice on top of an already full docket of cases and projects. We are so not in want of things to be working on. But given the demographics of the Latinx population and the impact we have had and continue to have on the well-being of this country, We must enact these bold plans. As I said earlier, all of this is in service of a greater mission of growing the leadership and strength of the Latinx community to withstand the attacks on us and our democracy and lead the way through adversity. To make all this happen, it's imperative that we build out and equip our team to carry out this critical work. As I said earlier, we're hiring more staff and we're retaining consultants to help us plan and get these efforts off the ground. And with these additional tools, our increased capacity and resources, we'll focus on expanding both our programs and our geographic footprint, looking into possible expansion in states where the Latinx population is growing a lot, but where policies and opportunities are just not keeping pace. And it is absolutely critical that we continue to have the support of communities, institutions, and all the people like you. And I will be seeking more funding from our loyal supporters, as well as new partners, to develop and execute these plans in the coming 2 to 3 years. So in closing, we are planning a series of great events around the country to celebrate our 50th and to plan the future. Right now, our staff is working on a dedicated microsite for the anniversary, and we'll email all of you soon with the link to the new site when it's up and coming. We're going to be posting there and sending information by email about all sorts of events, including webinars and receptions as they are confirmed. And I hope to see many of you at these gatherings to share more about our burgeoning plans for a bolder future and really talk with you about how we can make it happen. I leave you with a quote from one of my heroes, Justice Sotomayor, and it's a quote that really resonates with what Isabel talked about earlier when she was introducing me about the privilege of being a lawyer. Justice Sotomayor said, quote, "We educated privileged lawyers have a professional and moral duty to represent the underrepresented in our society, to ensure that justice exists for all." So I am proud to lead Latino Justice, an organization of not just lawyers, but of diverse, talented professionals who are working to ensure that justice indeed exists for all. And I really thank you for this wonderful opportunity to speak with you. Now, Sari and Diana and my staff, do we have any questions from the crowd? We have one question. How is Latino Justice working with Black and Brown allies in places where voting rights are being pulled back? That's a great question. Let me, before I answer though, just say again, the news is just so startling. The Brennan Center, which is just one of our great allies and all over voter suppression laws, the latest from them is that as of the end of 2021, 19 states had passed 34 laws designed at voter suppression. And that was after more than 440 bills were introduced in 49 states to do the same. And the road ahead is just going to be more of the same. So one of the ways we do this work is to ally with Black and Brown groups, or groups that are representing our Black and Brown community, to work on efforts like redistricting. So earlier I talked about the Unity Mapping Coalition efforts here in New York, where we partnered with the Asian American Legal Defense Fund and the Center for Law and Social Justice and Medgar Evers, who represent the Asian American and Black communities in New York City, respectively. Latino Justice, as representative of the LJ of the Latino community, worked. And what we did is we worked together on maps that we felt would amplify our voice as a community of color in the redistricting effort. And the idea behind it is a simple one, but one that does not happen a lot. And that is, we know that people in power and those forces who are trying to this very day to basically make sure that districts are drawn in a way that doesn't allow Black and Brown and Latino voters to have a chance to vote for to vote in candidates of their choice, they want us to, to go at each other, right? They want our communities not to work together, but to undermine each other, because that only helps them in the those who have power to keep that power. So I really saw the unity mapping effort as a model for the country about how communities of color should come together around voting rights, should come together around redistricting, because we know that we can protect our collective power that way in a much better way than if we are working at odds with each other. How is another question is, how is Latino justice getting more Latinx into social justice work? That's also a great question. We have, like I said, a great continuum of leadership development programs where we have kids starting in high school, and I call them kids, I'm sorry, children, but they really are children. They are kids in high school, where we are offering tutoring services, support services, seminars and webinars with all sorts of, with law school admissions officers from law schools, with Latinx attorneys who are practicing attorneys in all sorts of fields, and in particular in fields like civil rights and social justice. We set up these programs so that the youth can meet with these practicing attorneys and learn more about the profession, learn about their pathway there and what role they could possibly play. And I think the important message in all of this is for the youth to sort of see that other people who look like them and who speak like them, who speak Spanish, who speak their language, who may not come from a family of privilege and opportunity, but a family who has struggled and has successfully gotten these kids through high school and are ready to help them launch in their careers, that it is possible for them to get to law school. There is a way to finance it. There is a way to get through, and there are supports out there to get them through. So part of that is also just like, again, talking about social justice, and social justice work can be done as a civil rights attorney like I am. But I also know that there are many people who are in private practice who do a lot of pro bono work in furtherance of social justice. Our work, for example, on voting rights throughout this country, and our work, meaning the work of our organization, as well as many other organizations, nonprofits, would not be possible unless we had the participation of so many law firms to bring this litigation, and the resources they bring are enormous. So our message in our leadership programs is also that there are many ways to be a social justice leader, and let us help you find that way. So next question, given your interest in building out a racial justice center, are you concerned that the current Supreme Court's consistent constriction of rights under the Constitution may impede a forward-thinking racial justice agenda? And if so, how might this impact or inform the work that the center might pursue? Amazing question. Thank you for that. And that sort of the answer ties into what I was talking about earlier in terms of building out our capacity to do other work that's not necessarily litigation, because the federal courts are more hostile to so many of our issues. And I'll give the example around just generally around discrimination, and there are federal laws, obviously, and embedded in our Constitution, we have so many protections against discrimination. But the Supreme Court, as the questioner pointed out, in recent years has been making it harder and harder and harder for places like Latino Justice to prove discrimination in a hiring decision, in an education environment, for example. So because of that, one of the things that we'd want to do is try to look at are there ways that on an individual state level, we can build these kinds of protections into state constitutions and into state laws, so that we provide folks with the ability to prove discrimination without having, for example, to prove intentional discrimination, to show that there was a smoking gun and the person who made the discriminatory act in hiring or employment or in education actually said, oh, I want to discriminate against this person because they are Black or because they're Latinx, which we know is so impossible to prove. But instead, to build into our state laws and constitution standards is allow people to bring discrimination cases on the basis of disparate impact, meaning that even if the actors did not have a discriminatory intent, the practices they employed, the policies they put into place, again, in places like schools and educational institutions, those practices have a disparate effect, have the effect of discriminating against people of color or people of LGBTQ people or people who fall in a certain class. And here's the data that shows how those policies cause discrimination and exclude people from those spaces. So we are definitely going to share more plans and answer questions in subsequent communications about how we're doing this year. And we're going to be reporting on our progress and all the planning we're doing. So please look out for more. And I really appreciate all the questions and all your attention tonight. Thank you again, all, for being just wonderful allies. Isabel sounds like Wilkie Farr it knows what they're doing because they're hiring people and putting people like you in partnership tracks, and that's wonderful. So thank you again, all, and stay tuned. A lot of exciting stuff this year from Latino Justice.
Thank you, Lourdes. We're so excited to have you lead the organization going forward. It's been a privilege to hear you speak tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all, and good night.